Hello and greetings from UB. On behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the UB School of Management, we are delighted you are able to join us for today's webinar presentation. My name is Christy Fields, and I serve as the Director of Alumni Lifelong Engagement here at UB. And I'm also joined by my wonderful colleague, Joy Rona, who will assist in answering any questions. We are both so grateful you are able to join us today. Since 1923, the UB School of Management has been developing leaders and making an impact on individuals, businesses, and communities around the world. In their mission to define the future of management, Dean Iyer has unified the school around 4 distinct areas of focus: business analytics, social impact of management, business of climate change, innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership. Each of these initiatives are helping to realize their vision of a world of transformational leaders and organizations who change society for the better. With that said, we are excited to welcome today's featured presenter, Jiang. Jack earned his PhD in finance from the University of Iowa in 2012. He joined the faculty at UB in 2013, where he serves as an associate professor of finance and dean's fellow in the School of Management. Jack's main research interests lie in corporate finance, behavior finance, and social climate finance. He has published extensively in top finance journals and received numerous awards for research excellence. With climate change one of the most pervasive challenges of our time, and recent spikes in extreme weather events, such as wildfires, floods, and tropical storms, have made policymakers and researchers concerned about how climate will impact the economy. This webinar will delve into the responses of distinct stakeholders, such as corporate directors and bankers, to the complexities of climate change. Specifically, the focus will be on their reactions to climate-driven natural disasters and the rising sea levels. We will leave some time during today's webinar for Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentation, please go ahead and submit them through the questions section on your screen. You can chat those to us at any time during the presentation. And in addition, we will be recording today's session and we'll send you all a copy within the next 24 hours. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to our featured presenter, Jiang. Welcome, Jack.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christy. And it's my great pleasure to share my research regarding the climate change. And certainly it's a very important topic. The climate change has become one of the most pressing issues of our time. And I also would like to clearly define my talk. So the risk of climate change can be divided into 2 major categories. The first one is the physical climate risk. That's essentially risk result from climate events, such as wildfires, storms, and flood. The second major climate risk is essentially risk from the transition of the economy from based on, for example, carbon-based energy towards using clean energy. So there are so many important questions need to be answered, and I'm gonna concentrate my discussion or my talk on the physical climate risk. Okay, both are important, but I will concentrate my discussion on the physical climate risk. In terms of the physical climate risk, they can both be acute and chronic. What I mean by acute physical risk is essentially risk caused by extreme weather and the climate events. And the economic damage from the acute extreme weather and climate events have been more than 100 billion per year in the United States. There's also another type of the physical climate risk that's essentially more gradual. It's essentially chronic physical risk. For example, there's a gradual change in the temperature. There's some gradual change in sea level rise. So I have a couple of research related to extreme weather and or climate risks, climate disasters, and I have other research related to the sea level rise. That's today's my conversation discussion about. So just give us some ideas regarding why it's an important topic. So that's essentially what happened last Friday in New York City. There's a severe storm dumped more than 7 inches of rain in less than 24 hours in New York City last Friday. And essentially, there's more than 20 million people are affected by these severe storms. And that's some ideas about, it's really an important and timely topic, right? So also just to give us some ideas regarding what's a global perspective. So in this slides, you're gonna see that over years, what's the global economic damage or losses associated with weather-related disasters. And you can see that over the last 2 decades, there's an increasing trend in terms of total damage caused by climate risks or disasters. For example, over the period of 2001 to 2010, the total loss or damage is about 1.7 trillion. And you can see that in more recent decades, the total damage is about 2.5 trillion. Therefore, it's about 50% increase in the damage caused by climate change or climate disasters. So what I would like to share today is essentially, as I said, I'm going to concentrate my discussion on the physical climate change, or one of which is essentially climate disasters. I would like to share, for example, do the board members of large corporations responded to climate disasters? Of course, there are many interesting questions. We're going to ask, for example, whether or not they are more likely to adopt environmental friendly policies after they personally experience climate disasters. And we do find some evidence to suggest that they are more likely to adopt those environmental friendly policies after they've experienced disasters. In addition to that, I would also like to share my research regarding how banks responded to a sea level rise. In particular, we're going to study the corporate loans to large corporations who are subject to such risk. Those are 2 types of research work I would like to share today. Let's start with the first one. So in this slide, you're going to see that the billion-dollar weather or climate disasters over the last 40 years. And we see that there's more and more large climate disasters over the last 10 years. For example, during the period of 2000 to 2009, there's a total of 42 natural disasters or climate disasters, which caused more than $1 billion loss. However, over the period of 2010 to 2019, that number more than doubles. The whole idea is essentially there's more and more natural disasters or climate disasters. And our question is essentially, by notice that, for example, for ordinary people, the most visible adverse effects of climate change are extreme weather events. And also for scientific study on the climate change show that personal experience of extreme weather going to increase their perceptions of climate change, and they are more likely to adopt or support for the adoption of the climate change mitigation policies. That's for the ordinary people. There's some survey studies showing that after they personally experience natural disasters, they have more concerns about climate change. Okay, so in our study, we ask a question because there's a limited evidence on how corporate decision makers' disaster experience shape a firm's environmental policy. So we would like to know, for example, directors who personally experience a natural disaster, would he or she subsequently change a firm's environmental policy by, for example, pollute less? And empirically, how we test that is challenging because we cannot directly look at the firms located in the disaster area because a possible change in the environmental policy for those firms can be driven by many factors. For example, in addition to a shock to directors' climate change belief, that might drive the change in firms' environmental policy, right? But in addition to that, that change can also be caused by a demand from local communities, right? Or by other stakeholders, for example, institutional investors, they all wanted a change in first environmental policy. So it's really hard to identify such effect. So instead, we focus on remote firms, try to identify such effect. So empirically, how we proceed. Here's how we proceed. So suppose you see the red zone, that's essentially, let's assume that's the disaster area and a firm headquartered in that disaster area, right? So we are not looking at the firm A's change in their environmental performance. Instead, we are looking at a remote firm B. And why? Then you might ask why the firm B might have a change in environmental policies, right? Or the link is through the board interlock. The whole idea is essentially there are many board members of large corporations. They might sit in multiple firms. So a board member who might personally experience a natural disaster in firm A, he or she might have more concerns about climate change. Therefore, he or she might subsequently have a change the environmental policy in firm B. And empirically, we're going to compare the environmental policies in firm B with the environmental policies with firm C. Firm C is essentially our control firms. So they from the same industry or same location with firm B. So basically, we are not looking at the firm A's change in its environmental policy. Instead, we are comparing firm B and the firm C, otherwise are similar firms, but the firm B has a director who just experienced a natural disaster in a remote area. And we expect to see a change in firm B's environmental policies. Okay, so here's our data. Before I talk about our results, so we're going to concentrate our study on around 30 major climate disasters during the period of 2003 to 2017. And all those natural disasters are going to cause more than $1 billion loss. And also we rely on the board X, that's essentially the data set, allow us to identify the board interlock. In addition to that, we rely on the KLD database to calculate firms' environmental performance. Of course, in addition to that, we have the data regarding the firm's pollution emissions. We call it a total toxic release. Okay, so that's a good time to share our key findings. So we do find that after a firm's direct experience climate change or climate disasters at our interlocking firms, the focal firms do improve its environmental performance in the following years. By how much? If we look at the total toxic release, the total toxic release will be reduced by around 7.5%. In addition, we also document an increase in environmental performance by around 5%. So that's the magnitude of change. Another finding, remember, we assume that the personal disaster experience going to change the director's climate change belief or awareness, but we don't have the data. We cannot do a survey, for example, asking directors regarding their climate change belief, right? So instead, we conduct an indirect test. The argument is, if they are more concerned about climate change and global warming, then the directors are more likely to discuss the climate change or climate risk in their annual report. And we do find that's the case. So basically, we're using textual analysis. We find that these firms are more likely to discuss climate change, climate risk, and global warming in their annual reports. By how much? By 4%. Our last important result, there are many interesting results in our project, but the last important findings is essentially, we find that the female directors are more responsive than male directors, okay? So the interlock director can be female, can be male, right? So essentially, if the interlock director are females, it seems like the impact is larger. For example, we document the E performance is environmental performance score can increase by more than 10% versus the male interlock director, who has around 4% increase in the environmental performance. So the effects is way larger for the female directors. We think that's a nice contribution of our research because that we interpret as a causal evidence that the board diversity of female directors can enhance a firm's ESG performance. So takeaways from the first piece of research is essentially we find a large impact of directors. And it's important finding because some people might wondering, do it really matters? It's a big question essentially for directors' role. So for example, directors of large public firms, they only meet about 4 times per year, are not in charge of the day-to-day operations of the firm. So it's whether or not the direct matters is remain controversial. In our study, we document the fact that they do have an impact. So that's the way we interpret our finding. So director does matters. The direct disaster experience shape their belief, the climate change belief, which subsequently affect firms' ESG policies. So that's our first research. The second one I would like to share is regarding, do banks price physical climate risk into corporate loans? And of course, we concentrate the sea level rise risk, okay? So why it's important? Because corporate loans are a huge source of capital for economic activities. For example, if you do the aggregation, we found that corporate debt for large non-financial companies is about $11 trillion. That's corresponding to more than 50% of the GDP in 2020. So we believe that's important questions. And is that an important risk? Yes, you can see that there's a growing concerns about the hidden cost of the climate change. And for example, there's some discussion about that. The flooding or potential flooding from sea level rise could cost our planet more than 14 trillion. So we do believe that's an important question. So we can try to understand that to what extent the banks price the corporate loan price sea level rise risk in their loans to large corporations. So, I just give you a bit more information regarding how we proceed this research. For example, you can see that Florida certainly is struggling with the cost of the climate change. And if you look at this right now, it's essentially the Miami-Dade County. And you can see that that's the current sea level. With current sea level, that's the map. Let's assume, for example, there's a 3 feet increase in the sea level, and you can see that there's a light blue area will be flooded or inundated by the water, right? Let's assume there's a 6 feet increase in the sea level. When we can see more light blue area. So basically, there's more areas will be flooded or inundated by the sea level. So yes, indeed, it seems like the sea level risk is there. Okay, then the question is how we proceed in our research. So basically, we first identify corporate firms subject to sea level rising risk. For example, the firms or large corporations headquartered in the Dade County. So these firms will be subject to the sea level risk, right, or sea level increase risk. And then we compare loans issued to these firms with loans issued to firms not subject to such risk, but located in nearby counties. If you look at this figure, so basically this figure is the Florida state. So the Dade County is the county subject to the sea level increase risk. The green area is the counties not subject to the sea level risk, and we are comparing loans to firms located in the, for example, in the green area with the loans within the blue area. And if banks do price the sea level rise risk, we're going to expect a high cost of borrowing. What I mean by high cost of borrowing is essentially the interest rate they charged. Okay, so here's our key variables. We try several measures. Okay, the first one is essentially we are relying on the NOAA measure. Essentially, it's identify regions that will be inundated, assuming 3 feet or 6 feet increase in sea level. That essentially we got data from this website, from this like this figure, right? With a 6 feet or 3 feet, we are able to identify which counties will be inundated by rising sea level. In addition to that, we recognize that there's some limitations about the first measure because that haven't considered, for example, the socioeconomic conditions, for example, that haven't considered the potential defense systems, right? So therefore, we also tried another measure. Basically, we follow Alligator et al. 2013 paper, which estimate the expected annual loss as a percentage of GDP, assuming certain level increase in the sea level. Okay, just to give you some ideas regarding which counties are most subject to the sea level risk. I just give some ideas. For example, this essentially is a percentage, the potential loss caused by rising sea level as a percentage of the GDP. For example, yes, you can see that New Orleans, Orleans County, Miami County, they are the top 2 counties regarding the potential sea level rise risk. For example, in Orleans, the potential loss will be about 1.5% of the GDP. Then our variable interest will be to see if there's any positive correlation between the cost of borrowing to firms in this area with other firms. So a bit more regarding our data and the sample. So there's about more than 30,000 loans, the corporate loans, to more than 4,000 firms during the period of 1987 to 2017. After matching those data set, there's a total of around $11 trillion loans in our data. And just give you some idea regarding how much loans are lended to firms with positive sea level rise risk. It's about 24% of the loans will be issued to firms subject to the sea level rise risk. That's about 2.5 or 3 trillion. And also we classified the loan to both short-term and long-term loans. There's about 20% of loans are long-term. What I mean by long-term is essentially the time to maturity is more than 5 years. And if you the whole idea is that because the sea level rise risk is usually considered as a long-term risk, therefore there's more potential to have an impact for the long-term loans. Okay, so here is our key findings. So we do find evidence that the interest rate for the long-term bank loans will increase with the sea level risk. And just give you some ideas regarding what's the potential magnitude. We estimate that the 1 standard deviation increase in the sea level rise risk can increase the cost of bank loans, essentially the interest rate by about 4 basis points. And that effect going to be especially stronger for geographically non-diversified firms. So what I mean by geographically non-diversified firms is essentially, for example, a firm might have multiple business operations, might operate in different states, right? So we consider a firm is geographically diversified if a firm have multiple operations in different states, right? Versus another firm whose business operations are heavily concentrated, for example, in Miami area. So the whole idea is if a company is heavily concentrated in a county which is subject to sea level rise risk, then the effect should be stronger. And we do find that's the case. for geographically non-diversified firms, the interest rate for their corporate loans will increase by more than 7 basis points. So just give us some idea regarding what that means. So for example, take an average loan in our data, which is about the value is face value is around 350 million with 7 years time to maturity. That gonna causes the 2 million extra or additional interest payment if that firm is subject to the sea level rise risk. So that's a potential effect. They do. So if the firms headquartered or located in place with potential risk, sea level rise risk, then they pay more, right? So another interesting finding I would like to share is essentially there's some variations, right? So sometimes the banks pay more attention. Sometimes the bank may pay less attention on the potential sea level rise, right? So we ask a question, for example, do banks pay more attention in times of heightened media attention? The first question, how we capture that, right? So we borrow the measure from Engels et al. 2019 paper. Basically, they construct a measure to capture media attention to the climate change. They call it the Wall Street Journal Climate Change News Index. Basically, they do some textual analysis. So it's a raw index, describes the fraction of the Wall Street Journal dedicated to the topic of the climate change. For example, over a certain period, there are total Wall Street articles. They also classify certain articles describing about climate change stories. They calculate percentage. That's a simple idea behind that index. And that's essentially, that's the figure from that paper. And the first one is essentially the Wall Street Journal Climate Change News Index. And you can see that there's a lot of variations in terms of the index, right? And we see, for example, we see the media attention using the Wall Street Journal article. We see some spikes, for example, in 2009, there's a United Nations Climate Change Conference. For example, there's a Paris Agreement in 2016. Certainly, that's the time when likely media paid attention to climate change, and then might cause the bank to respond to the climate change more. Is that the case in our data, in the bank loan data? Yes, we indeed find that about 3 months after media coverage spike, the effect is more than doubles. So for example, just to give some ideas regarding the effect. So basically, for example, when 3 months after United Nations Climate Change Conference, we see some loans issued after 3 months after this conference, then the banks can charge extra more interest rate to borrowers who is subject to the sea level rise risk. Okay, so those are the two important findings in this paper. To summarize, the main takeaway from today's conversation is we ask 2 questions related to the climate change. The first one is related to the acute, both of which is related to the physical climate change, right? Or climate risk. The first one is more acute. So basically, we ask, do board members of large corporations respond to climate disasters? And we believe we do find some evidence. Yes, they do respond. They are more likely to adopt environmental friendly policies after they personally experience climate disasters. The second question we asked in our paper is essentially, do banks respond to sea level rise? We look at by looking at corporate loans to large corporations, and we do find some evidence. Banks charge high interest rate on such loans. So I think that's all for my talk. And I would like to, for example, if I have any questions, I would like to answer in the Q&A sessions, for example. Yeah. Hi, Christy.
Excellent, Jack. Thank you so much. And I have some questions here to get us started with. And if there's more questions, the question box on your screen, just put those in and I'll see those come through.
Okay.
So Jack, just to get us started, let me pull up this first question here.
Yeah.
So with banks changing their loan practices to companies and firms, would that also potentially impact personal loans to individuals at all? Maybe the size of loan, interest rate, length of loans? Your thoughts there?
That's a very good question. So first of all, okay, so this study we talk about the banks charge high interest for large corporations, right? Certainly, the banks also do business, for example, makes on the mortgage, right? And their papers looking at that. So basically, they find that there are many real estate, right? They suppose a house is nearby in the Miami area, Dade area. They found that the housing price will be affected by the potential rising sea level. And they also find that the banks charge high mortgage rate or charge high interest rate for the mortgage rate. Yeah, if the house is subject to the potential rising sea level.
Excellent. And Jack, just as a maybe piggybacking off that question a little bit, with the interest rates going up, bank loans issued to the companies, are you finding that companies and even individuals in residential areas, are they moving out of these counties that are at high risk for sea level rising? Are they moving elsewhere? Are you seeing businesses and organizations staying out of there because of the economy?
So that's a good question. So first of all, I think the firm can relocate, right? And but it's also very costly. So we don't observe many cases that the firms try to reallocate their business in our data. I think one possible reason is because potential, the costs arising from moving their headquarters to another state, simply because the potential sea level rise. And we do have few cases the firm switch their headquarters or move their business to other states, which is not subject to the sea level rise risk. And we observe their cost of borrowing. What I mean by cost of borrowing is essentially the interest rate whenever they borrow from banks after they move to place which are not subject to rising sea level is lower afterwards.
Great, thank you there, Jack. This next question, kind of going back to maybe a little bit in the beginning of your presentation. So your research shows that businesses change their practices after a major climate event.
Yes.
Can you share some examples how businesses have changed in reaction to climate change or climate disasters?
So, okay, so yeah, I think, yeah. So, yeah, that's a very good question, actually. So we document overall the environmental performance improved, right? A natural question is how they improve their environmental performance, right? So one way to do so, it can just reduce the toxic release, right? So we found that the toxic release was reduced by about 7.5%. We also find actually they invest more in green R&D. And I didn't show that in our presentation, but we look at that. We do find that the companies spend more money in their green R&D, and we also document those companies also have more green patent afterwards, presumably driven by, for example, they are spending more money in the R&D green innovation or investment. Those are two possible channels through which how the firms responded to natural disasters afterwards. Does that?
Yeah, absolutely, Jack. Thank you for that. It looks like those are all the questions that have come through at this time. So, Jack, I just want to say thank you on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the UB School of Management. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your expertise. When I think about $14.2 trillion, just as a cost from flooding from sea level alone, it's just amazing to think about what the impact is here. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us. We are so grateful for that. Our webinar series is going to continue next Wednesday. More information in the follow-up email. But I do want to let you know as well, we have recorded today's session, so you're going to receive that tomorrow. So about 24 hours from today, just check your inbox for that information. And Jack, I'll turn it back to you too for any closing remarks on your side.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you so much, all. Take care, stay well, enjoy the rest of your day, and go Bulls. Thank you all.
Yeah, bye.